Hey guys, Sebastian here with another Cardano update. This time going over the March 29th update. Sorry this video is a bit late for this week, but I was busy with some other stuff. Before we get into it, I just wanted to go over two other brief things. One of them is that Circle, which is one of the companies that wrote a lot of the code for the Cardano settlement layer, has parted ways with IOHK in a mutually agreed upon fashion. So there seems to be no split between the two. IOHK has had like a shift in directions and shift in the way they want the engineering to go forward, from a more build it up kind of perspective to a research let's kind of think about the problems for a bit, think of exactly what we want to do, and then proceed kind of style. And so they've changed contracts with another company to kind of match that. So that's one update. The other one is that somebody made this nice website called CardanoUpdates.com, which shows you pull requests across all the Cardano related GitHub projects as they happen live, which I think is pretty cool. It's a pretty useful website. So if you're interested in following Cardano updates as they happen, like in a more live fashion, this website is a very handy way to do that. All right, so let's get into it. So the first thing is exchange onboarding and support. So they've been putting a lot of focus into this API v1. So this is most of their work is actually for this. So let's get into it. The first one is something we talked about previously, which is an API endpoint for retrieving address meta information, which is not here. So you might remember I mentioned that this is the meta information they're getting is mostly the one for the HD wallet. That's to say, when you create a wallet in Daedalus, you only have a single key, right? The 12-word password, and from that you can generate multiple addresses, and that's a technology called HD wallet. And so this meta information gives you information about the wallet index and stuff like that. That's what I believe what it is there for. And it's apparently exchanges wanted this feature. Next one, they're talking about the feedback they got from their V1 betas. You remember they released the beta version of the V1 API and they asked for feedback. So we've been showing you the progress as they move along on this every week. And there you can see they've gone through most of the items now. There's still a few items left, but they're making good progress on this. The next thing they talked about is quick check for the new wall API. So this is down here. So you might remember the API, the new V1 API is done using this technology called Servant, which is a way for you to only specify a spec. You say this is what the API looks like, and this is kind of how it behaves, and then the library will generate for you the client and the server automatically, along with the Swagger documentation or other documentation you want. So they already built that up, and they wanted to use this tool library called Servant Quick Check, which is a publicly available library on GitHub. So if you don't remember, Quick Check is a tool that generates test cases, not test cases, but like permutes data to try and get the good test data for you. And so this kind of mixes the two. So you can see it does something like, say you want to have an API, and your API should only return JSON objects, should not return a 500 error response, and a few other things. And so they wanted to use this library, but they decided that they have other stuff to do, and they're short on resources, so they're deprioritizing this for now. But they may get back into it later. Next one is about the logs for the old version of the API versus the new version API, which is over here. So if you're wondering what happened, it's essentially that if you look at the Cardano repository, there's actually a folder called wallet new. So when they made the new version of the API, I believe what they decided to do was create this new folder called wallet new, and this new folder will contain all the V1 API and all this information. And here they're trying to make sure that the V0 API, which is the one that came out a while back, and the V1 API, which is relatively new, it's still beta, have some sort of like a similar behavior to just make it easier to transition and make it more readable and all this kind of stuff. So this is kind of what this is about. Next up is testing for the wallet key import endpoint, which is down here. So essentially what happened with this one, I believe, is that yeah, so they wanted to write some tests for their new API, okay? And to generate some tests for the API, they had to make like, you know, like fake blocks to apply to the chain, fake genesis block, these kind of things to kind of like build up a blockchain for the test to run on. Okay, and the problem is that this is fine, but they also have a different work item going on that's like a long-running task where they're trying to build up a inductive wallet. So you might remember Duncan Kutz's talk about this a long ways back. I think it was like in January, where they're talking about they wanted to get a test framework such that they can generate blockchains on the fly for testing purposes. And this is like something they've been working towards for a while to have better testing. And so if they write like complicated tests for these integration tests, then it's kind of like a duplicating work, right? So for these integration tests, they kind of wrote like, you know, as simple as possible dummy scripts, which will kind of eventually in the future, once this proper blockchain generation framework is done, will replace these integration tests, I believe. So this is kind of like what happened here. So if you look up the issue they mentioned, which is 2371, there's like some discussion going on and trying to figure out how they should address this, and this is kind of the result. And next up, they're talking about the NTP server. So this is actually like partially mentioned here and partially mentioned like later on down in the networking section. But they've been doing a lot of work on the NTP front. So if you don't know, the NTP is I believe the network time protocol, something of the sort. It's something that runs on your computer to essentially make sure your computer clock is synchronized. And so you might remember there's been a few issues with this. So for example, you remember there's one issue where like if you launch your wallet, it will tell you like, hey, your time is not synced correctly. Like we can't let you launch your wallet if the time's not synced correctly. So there have been some issues with this. And they also have some settings to disable NTP for like a debug mode, and they've had some problems with that. So they're trying to just like fix a few problems, do some refactoring, make the system cleaner. So the first thing they did is that the API now lets you get info about the time difference from NTP server. And mostly it lets you get just not the time difference, but also returns like a structure, and they will possibly add like more information about the NTP data in the future to the API. They also have some other stuff, like I mentioned, removing the no NTP option that they've added previously for some of the scripts. So this is like a debug flag. So what happens is that you remember if you launch your wallet and your computer time is not synced, you get an error message like, hey, your wallet is not synced, or sorry, your computer's time is not synced. And if you get that error, you can actually pass in the no NTP command line option, and it will disable that check. And they're talking about how they had some bug related to this, which they've just fixed with this, and they also did some refactoring of the code. So that's what this NTP stuff is all about. Next up, they had, I believe, yeah, they had some just implementation of this addresses API endpoint, which they've been working on for quite a while. I believe like it's come up again and again, and so they're talking about like this endpoint hasn't been implemented yet, and this one's been kind of like a lingering around, but they're still working on it, and they're trying to just make as much work towards getting this V1 API shipped as fast as possible. This is like their main priority right now, I think, judging by the amount of like stuff that's gone into it. Speaking of which, another one of the priorities has been the paper wallet. So I've been showing you guys progress on this every week through their checklist. And as you can see, the checklist is almost done. There's just a few things left. They mentioned they ran into some problems causing them to have to like redesign some stuff, wait for some stuff around. So I'm not sure if we'll see this being released as soon as they had originally hoped. But as you can see, it's like mostly done. So we should be seeing this fairly soon. They also mentioned that, interestingly enough, they have another change to the React polymorph library coming up. So you might remember last week we were talking about this library that IOHK wrote for their React JavaScript library called polymorph, which they use to render their UIs, and they had a fix to it, and apparently they're doing some more work on this. This has not been put up on their GitHub repository yet, so I don't know exactly what features are adding this kind of stuff. But they're saying they're doing some new components and some refactoring. Next up is the wallet backend. So this one is kind of strange because I noticed that a lot of these work items are actually like not up in public on the GitHub repository, but I'm gonna do my best to go through it anyways. So we talked about the wallet spec last week. They made two changes to it, two main changes to it, and I think they made another change this week, which I just realized now I did not bring up, so you won't be able to see it. But they've been adding on to the spec fairly frequently recently. So if you're interested in seeing what the formal specification for the wallet is like, it's actually grown to quite a large document now, with a lot of fully fleshed out sections. So it's a good read. But as they keep adding onto it and adding sections, you know, if you read it now, you don't have a guarantee that it will stay the same for too long. So just like be aware of that. But you know, it's interesting to read anyways. But yeah, they mentioned these three issues right here. Finish, blah blah, and none of these are up yet, so I have no idea like what any of these are. The next one they mention is I think 2382, which is also not up. So I don't know. This is like a very generic statement. They did put up 2381, which is over here, which is the inductive wallet I was talking to you guys about. So one of the things they've been trying to do is work on this restoration feature, and kind of related to it in a sense is this rollback, which they've also been working on. So these like two issues they've been tackling. They've been adding sections to like rollbacks and restoration a lot to the wallet spec if you're interested. And so essentially what they're trying to do is in their inductive wallet, which is the wallet they're trying to build up for testing purposes, or sorry, well, the blockchain they're trying to build up programmatically for testing purposes. They want to be able to test scenarios where somebody has a chain and then suddenly it is no longer the longest chain and they have to roll back and move to a different chain and see if all of the cases are handled correctly. So this is kind of like talking about that. Next up, they're talking about yeah, so the wallet storage for restoration, which is I believe over here, which is to say this is something they've been working on for a while. So you remember, if you launched the wallet a long time ago, and you forgot your key, you had to do the restoration right, and it would like basically pause your wallet for like days on end. It was like doing a very slow restoration, and in the last release they made that restoration faster, so now it should not take nearly as long. It still takes a while, but not nearly as long. Now they're doing the next step, which is to say as you launch the wallet and put in your restoration key, you will not be able to send transactions as it's restoring, but you will be able to see the balance update. You'll be able to go around the UI and all this kind of stuff. So it'll be better than like the you know, just a blank screen saying like restoring. So they mentioned that they actually wanted to allow you to do the sending while it's restoring, and they're talking about how they ran into some issues trying to build up this feature. And so they said, okay, for this first version for now, just to get it out of the door, get this feature shipped, For now, the sending button will be disabled, so you'll not be able to like send transactions as it's restoring, but it may come in the future. So that's what they're working on. Another like a tangentially related thing is that they're adding an API endpoint to get the progress of the restoration. So the reason that you in the first version you could not see the progress of the restoration was partially because of this. So now they'll have a nice endpoint so that the wallet can connect to the node and say like, hey, how far are you in restoration, exactly what's going on, and it'll be able to like print a nice UI to really help you understand how far your wallet is in the restoration process, which is nice. I also noticed that I forgot to mention in the TLS stuff. Actually, that's next up. Okay, never mind. I forget to mention. I think I got my tabs in the wrong order. Yeah, next up is the TLS check, which is also something they've been working on for a while. So if you don't remember, the TLS is like the certificate management for the node that it uses, and you need these certificates to be able to use the API and all this kind of stuff. They made a few changes. One of them, they added a certificate generation utility. So if you wanted to generate certificates, I have a nice utility tool to use for that. They also, I showed this to you guys in the previous week, I believe, where they added some documentation. Here you can see the documentation about how these certificates work, how you can generate certificates, like exactly what's going on with them. So if you're interested, and if you have these certificate problems, like if you're a programmer who's been trying to use the API or whatever, and you're trying to set up your own node, and you're running into this like a certificate error, you may want to give this a read. This is still in a work in progress. So you can see, I believe, like down here, they say like it will close for now, update later. So this this document will be changed like after they do some more work. But it might be an interesting read for you now, and it might help you. And then the last stuff is just the server TLS check, which I mentioned to you guys in the previous week, I believe. And I think they're just like still trying to figure exactly how this is gonna work. And I think they probably have it mostly done by now. I didn't check the code, didn't have time to look into it as much. But this item's been around for a while. But yeah, they say successfully completed, so it's probably like close to being done. And yeah, that's basically it for all the core updates. They have some mention on the networking for the NTP, which I already talked about before. For the Linux installer, they say that there's basically like a no particular update. You might remember in the last week for the Linux installer, they said they have it working kind of, and they have the installer script done, and they've done some testing, and there's no problem in the testing, so everything seems to be going well. They had some audit report, which I think is interesting because they didn't mention anywhere. There was no public audit as far as I know. I tried like search around the internet, but I couldn't find any like a recent audit report. So this must be like an internal report. They mentioned that there was some like a small issues they need to address. But other than that, they're as I mentioned, focusing on the V1 API and the exchange documentation for now. But as far as I know, this is done. So we may see it come soon. I'm not sure if there's any like a blocking issue and the reason that's stopping them from shipping this, now basically. So we'll see what happens. But I would say like probably this is like going to come up at some point. Yeah, and then lastly for the KILE sidechain smart contract and like all these things, there's no nothing particular to report. They're still making work on the ILE. There's just, it's work, but it's nothing like super exciting, whatever. It's just, work. For the side chains, they're talking about submitting a paper in May. So this is coming up real soon. If you're interested in checking out the paper, you can go check it out now. I believe it's like a chimeric ledgers. I think it's like related to this. I think it might be from the same group. I'm not entirely sure. I would guess it is, and this may be the paper they're submitting, or it may be a different one. I'm not, sure. They don't mention like what the paper is, but it's coming soon, so that's something to look forward to. They're also talking about like a hiring. They've been hiring people for a while for the smart contract language team, so they're still hiring more people, and it's progressing. So I guess they've hired people so far. Marlow, we saw the version being the first beta version being released on their GitHub last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago, something like that. So if you're interested, so you can go check this out. They talk about the asset locality paper nearing completion, workshop on design in April 2018, which may also be actually the Chimeric Ledgers. I'm not too sure, but you know, this is like another paper to keep an eye on. And that's it for the report. There's like a few other small stuff. One of them is they did clean up for the follow the Satoshi related code. So it means they're still like you know, thinking about this proof of stake. The Shelly release at least. They're like you know, moving some code around really to this. They changed the Explorer front end to be buildable with Nix. I think probably most people watching this video don't really care, but if you ever try to launch your own Explorer front end, your own custom front end, because for some reason you didn't like the one Cardano built, this makes building the code that they provided easier, as opposed to before where it was kind of like a strange different system. They've been working on the tech spec, which is to say this is a document that they've been working on a fair bit recently, which is how to change what they need to change in the infrastructure to be able to get light wallets, hardware wallets, all this kind of stuff. So doing a lot of investigation into what they have to do for this, and so this is probably like one of their focuses and should be like, you know, something to watch for in the coming weeks. This is also another thing they've been working on and continue to be working on, which is also related to lightweight wallets along with hardware wallets. So something to keep track of. Added some new use cases of the API docs. If you're interested in the API doc, they have like a new update to the docs themselves, so you may be interested in checking it out. And also, this is like some other thing. They're merging the network develop into develop, which may seem kind of like a cryptic if you're unaware of like the branches and how this works. If you're not a programmer, I guess. So a lot of the networking features we've been talking about for the past like a while have actually not been to the develop branch on GitHub. They've been to the networking develop branch. And this is a pull request somebody made to like bring all the features down over. So they're talking about like the features that's bringing in. So this is good to see that, you know, they think that this networking branch is in a good enough state that they can take all these features and move them over to develop. Which, if you don't know, the develop branch is the one they use to schedule releases. So like that means if it's in the develop branch, it'll probably make it in the next release. Probably not the one like coming up like right now, possibly the one next month. So that's it for this week's update. As usual, you can find me on Twitter, YouTube. I'm on Patreon also, so you can follow me on the platforms. You want to keep track of these updates along with the other video I made. If you have any comments, questions, I'm always willing to answer, and hopefully I'll see you guys again next week.